That's community would be my guess. This road. Because the 55 plus is over there through the woods.
And there is an area to get into the area because they're going to cul-de-sac right away going through it. I don't even know what.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, stop it.
This is the December 6th meeting of the Litchfield School Board Facilities Improvement Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, I'd like to welcome back the members of our committee. We've taken a bit of a hiatus. There is pretty much one topic on today's agenda, and that's to discuss the our pivot to utilizing school-owned property for the new elementary school project. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Jetty to give us some updates and begin that discussion.
Great, thank you. So just a couple of things. When the board first became aware that the land would not be available to us, we immediately began sort of thinking about, so what is our backup plan? Really important, I think, to Litchfield taxpayers that we take advantage of where we are in the queue relative to state building aid. There's $7 million on the table, and we have a high degree of confidence that that's available to us this year. And so we felt that to not begin work on what we would do for our aging elementary school would be a potentially loss of that money, and so we didn't want to take that risk. So we immediately started to re-engage with our team and have come up with a plan that we think is going to work very well for an elementary school. And we re-engaged back with Kyle and Dave Ely, and I'm going to invite them up to the table to work with us as we walk through this part of the presentation. And remember, Kyle is the architect of record who is working with a team in order to come up with this plan. Dave is our owner's rep who is looking out for the project requirements that we previously identified and making sure that everything goes smoothly with this. So I'll reintroduce Kyle back to the public and have him join us at the front if we can. And Kyle, it might make sense if we get the documents maybe on the chairs so that anybody who joins us late can grab those docs.
Co-present with him? Sure.
Would it be all right to close that door behind us?
Of course you can, yep.
Thank you.
You're going in the hot seat.
Yeah, no, not at all.
And so the documents have been produced. The design team also includes Principal Mitchell from the elementary school. He's the principal of GMS, so he's had a key part in this. B.A. Totten and I also sit on that group. And then Ms. Harrison and Mr. Shoemaker have joined us as they've been able to help give some advice. So, we've had eyes on these documents, have given input to the team, and we're bringing them forward tonight. And just to clarify, what I think our purpose is tonight is to get this out in the public sphere, to let people know what it is that we've done, to open the floor to community comment at the end of the meeting, and to take this forward to the board tonight for further discussion. And then we have another facilities meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, where we would have time to digest this, think about it, offer feedback and so forth next Wednesday. And then it'll go to the full school board for a vote on Wednesday the 20th. So that's sort of the timeline that we imagine. Because if we're going to have a warrant article this year, we're under a timeline in order to make that happen. So that's sort of the ask for this evening, is to think, ask questions, and let's start to digest this. So, Kyle, is that enough of a tee up for you? Are you good? Or anything else I should have said?
No, that sounds pretty good. I'm assuming you'll want me to kind of walk you through the plans, some of the decisions that were made, and then the costs. I'll take us a little bit of a step back just to recap some of the past. When we were first hired, we were asked to look at the property adjacent to the middle school on the upper plateau of the current property that we own. And instead of looking solely at that, we looked at a bunch of different options, and 2 years ago came up with 5 options. The best option being a new build on a new site. But obviously, as Mike just pointed out, the availability of new property became apparently elusive to us. And so we're back to the other options that we looked at, and the best option out of those was to build new on the existing Griffin site, on this, near where it currently is, but further back in the property, away from the road, and in an area that appears to be a little bit more dry and buildable than what we were looking at before. So you can see on the screen, and people have the plans in front of them. Being an architect, I like to point at the drawings. The middle school property is the red outline, the middle school being up in this location, not shown. The current Griffin is this white box down here in the very corner, the triangle piece of the property. What we're looking at is putting the new building on top of the ball field that's in the furthest back, and part of it just into the woods on the lower end of the slope of the woods. There is some wetlands in the woods, but this orientation actually keeps the majority of the building out of that. There might be a little mitigation that has to go on to make that work, but otherwise it fits in pretty nicely. The gym and the entrance would be about where the ball field currently is. There's another area of wetlands just off to the edge of this that it avoids. What's nice about this arrangement is people entering in off of the Route 3A, the approach to the building is this straight, long driveway that heads straight to the front entrance. So you've got a nice, long car queuing area for parents picking up and dropping off. It's also a very obvious line of sight to the main door, so there's no question about where visitors are coming from or going to. There's a long loop at the front door to drop off students and then back out through the parking. Buses would come in and take a left and go into a completely different bus loop. So cars and buses now have their own parking area, completely separated. So students that are going to and from their parents' car is in one loop. Students going to and from the buses, completely different. No crossover, no conflict with the cars or the kids walking to and from. So that actually works out pretty well for us. We then continue in the back with a service lane that gets to the back of the gym for deliveries and for the kitchen, and then a service drive that goes all the way around the back for a fire lane. So the siting works very well in several different areas. It works well in terms of the soils and where it is on the property. It works pretty well with the driveways and the length of the driveway in for car queuing. It works pretty well for keeping the cars and the buses separated and for keeping service drives separated. And it sets it up nicely with a good view to and from Route 3A to the building. Seems to be plenty of room. I wouldn't say plenty of room. There seems to be an adequate amount of room. It maintains the ball fields in the front by the road. There'd be a new bridge across that wetland area to get to it, so it's an easy access from the school to the ball fields. And you still have that connection up to the middle school. At the middle school, where we had originally planned to put the building, we're proposing 2 new ball fields to replace the ball field that we're building on top of down below. What's nice about that is that those would be used primarily by the middle school, and they would have direct access. They're not having to walk down the street and along the road in order to get to the ball fields. It would be right there next to the middle school. So the pairing of the ball fields with the middle school and the new school down below next to the existing just seems to be a really nice fit. Any questions on the site plan before we move to the floor plan? Yeah, Brian?
Why 2 baseball fields? I know originally when the location was going to be across the street, we talked about a soccer field. I don't know if
So
that area.
the idea is that it'd be 2 baseball fields or baseball, softball with the ability for soccer in the
That's what I was wondering if it
outfields.
was big enough.
Yeah, it's big enough for all that.
And also, Brian, that would replace, so it still currently shows the softball field down there,
Yeah.
but then that could be converted into another type field as well. Because softball, baseball will move up the hill.
Right, or the town
Yeah.
could use it, or,
Exactly,
Yeah.
so it doesn't necessarily have to stay as a softball field.
I guess the other thing I'd address right up front is that this arrangement allows the existing building to stay in place while construction is happening, so there's little to no disruption to education happening at the existing building. And then when it's completed, that existing building is kind of on its own. Now, whether it gets demolished or whether it stays, it's the choice of the district, but that this new design keeps us completely separate from it, which I think is a big benefit.
Well, we talked after the middle school project, which remember, that was gonna be a summer project, and it wasn't gonna be disruptive. And it turned into being quite disruptive, and we just think the town doesn't want another disruption, so this is a really minimally disruptive. Kids will have fun on the playground, watching trucks come and go, and a school being built in front of them. It'll be a viewing area, I'm sure, but it's not gonna impact the educational climate, so it's really a great idea.
Other questions on the site? We can move to the floor plans.
All right, let me take you to the floor plan next.
Sorry to be hovering over your head.
No, you're fine.
All right, so this one I gotta get to, see on a page here. So, Kyle, I'm gonna
Yeah, just stay in the
Put you
middle
here
and
and-
I'll work our way
work up
around.
and down. I'll start with the entrance, how's that?
Yeah, so if you saw on the site plan, the main entrance is pretty well defined. And so what we'll have is that car loop right off the front entrance of the building. You've got a canopy out front, and then a locked, secure vestibule with access directly to the admin area, so people can be checked in. And then on the opposite side, a conference room, so that way if there's a meeting with parents, the parents don't need necessarily come all the way into the building. They come in the locked vestibule, they get access to the conference room, and then teachers and staff can have access from the opposite side. So that way parents never breach the secure perimeter of the building. So that's kind of a nice arrangement at the front entrance. Inside there is sort of a large lobby area, and this connects numerous locations in the building. Opposite the vestibule is the Learning Commons, or the library. I feel that the Learning Commons is really the nerve center of a school, and therefore having it in a very prominent location right off the main entrance is really important to kind of highlight its significance. Again, the administration is also right next to the front vestibule. And then to the left, as you're walking in, is the cafeteria. The cafeteria is connected to the gym with an operable partition, so it's really one big open room from the cafeteria all the way through the gymnasium. And then at the back of the gymnasium is a separate gym entrance, so that way you can utilize the gymnasium after hours without having access to the rest of the building. So basically from the main circulation area, you have access to the admin, the Learning Commons, the cafeteria, the gym. So all the public zones are essentially right off of the main lobby. But with that, the gym, because of its location sort of further back, and we've also added the public toilet rooms off of the gym lobby. That way, the gym could just the gym could be used after hours. Co-ed volleyball, Boy Scouts. There's a lot of activities that could be happening after hours in the gym without having access through the rest of the building. And then the same thing for the Learning Commons as well, that you could have access to that and people could come and go through the front door. The doors to the classroom wings could be locked to prevent people. If you get, a Boy Scout meeting and the younger sibling runs down the corridors and starts going in the classrooms, we can lock the doors to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. From that point, we've got, besides the admin, we've got areas like the nurse in the darker blue and guidance in the lighter purple. The green areas are resource rooms, special ed and specialist offices, and then the orange rooms on the two wings are classrooms. So you've got off of this core that we're looking at in the middle, paging down, we've got the kindergarten and preschool wing. You've got the classrooms on the outside, and then in the corridor space in the circulation areas are collaboration zones, which are relatively small areas for just 2 or 3 students to work together, maybe doing some independent reading, maybe with one-on-one with a teacher. There'll be some display areas and things of that nature. The concept here is that education doesn't always happen just in the classroom, and we want to create activity zones and things of interest throughout the building where education can happen anywhere. And then also, so some support zones like the multi-use areas that might have support for the teachers as well. Then going up the page, we've got the first and second grade classrooms arranged in a very similar sort of V-shaped with the classrooms on the outside, the collaboration and circulation on the inside. And then if we move upstairs.
Before we leave this, so one thing to point out is that we have made a decision in looking at our enrollment numbers to build 5 classrooms for each grade level. Originally, there were 4 with 1 flex room, but we're looking at the numbers at Griffin now, and we just think that we might be undersized at that rate. So we have designated 5 classrooms per grade because that just seems to be where the enrollment trend is headed.
Is 3 for preschool adequate?
We think 3 for preschool will still be adequate.
Yeah, as a half-day program, in the future, we figure we can meet all those needs.
And we have more ability to manage that in terms of program design than we do with kindergarten, which is a full day.
Yeah.
And right now, 5 is where we are, so.
It might be worth mentioning now, because you just brought it up, the enrollments, that I've dug into the enrollments pretty carefully recently, and we were talking about it just before the meeting today, a little bit about the trends. And that is that enrollments for the past 10 or 15 years have been declining, and there's a big reason for it. People might not be aware that it's because the baby boom generation, which is the largest generation to come through the United States ever, had an unprecedented number of children as well. But the generation between the baby boomers and their kids, the X generation, they're a much smaller group, by like 30 or 40% smaller. So they had 30 or 40% fewer children. And that's what's been coming through the system for the last 15 years. Now that they've graduated, it's the baby boomers' children, roughly the millennials. I call it the baby boom echo, because that's really what they are. They're just starting to have children later in life, and they're having fewer of them. So what's happening is it's kind of like a rock being thrown into a calm pond, where you have a big splash, and then each ripple that comes out is slightly flatter, slightly lower than the previous one. So we're going to see an uptick, and I went on the vital statistics webpage for the state and downloaded the births for the state the past few years, and 2022 was the largest number of births that we've had in about 10 years. And that Litchfield in particular had about a 20% uptick in that 1 year. So it went from 60 births per year to 80 in 1 year. So that 80 children are 1 year old, and so they're going to be in kindergarten 4 years from now. So we got to be prepared for that. That 80 children, because of immigration into town, and I hadn't noticed at the last meeting we had, but coming around the corner onto Albuquerque where the white fence is, I didn't realize how big that development's going to be. So it shows you why those 80 students or 80 children that were born, that are 1 year old now, are really going to be 100 when they reach kindergarten, because you've got other people moving in between. It's about a 20% increase from births to kindergarten. A long-winded way of saying we can't undersize the building, because you would get stuck if we designed for 4 classrooms per grade, even though that's what you have right now. You are going to need 5 classrooms per grade in 4 years.
Kyle, 2 other things to just address, I think, on this. Toilets in the classrooms are required at these
No.
levels. Which levels are they?
It's not required,
Okay.
it's just a really good idea. So we're doing,
Yes, it is.
Indeed.
indeed. So a lot of people ask, well, what's the requirements from the state? The state doesn't require that, and in fact, in the new round of rules, the state's dialing back on their space requirements. They're kind of relying on architects and districts to, do what's best, do what's in best practice. And it's best practice to have a toilet in each classroom in kindergarten, first and second grade. So we're not putting them in third and fourth upstairs, but just the first grade.
That's why I wanted to highlight it before we go upstairs. And classroom sizes are 1,000 square feet, which do meet the
For
current
kindergarten, preschool, and 900 square feet for the upper grades.
And we are required to have classes for up through grade 2 on a first floor, correct? So that's,
Yeah, so kindergarten and first grade have to be on the first floor. Second grade has to be within one floor of the first floor. So they could be upstairs, but honestly, it makes more sense to pair them with first grade on the first floor. This is not just about, having space for the kids, it's also about combining and having collaboration between ages. And so combining first and second grade together and then third and fourth grade together, it's a nice collaborative setup. So yeah,
Before the second floor, can you talk about the size of the gym and where that? Slightly larger gym than a typical elementary, right?
Yep, so at your current gymnasium at Griffin is about 3,500 square feet, and this is designed to 5,800 square feet. And so what we're doing is we're sizing the court itself to be middle school sized. It might not have the sidelines and everything a middle school would have, but at least the court would be middle school sized, so that way the middle school could also use this for their practices, maybe even games. It adds a little bit more flexibility, adding just a little bit more square footage to the gymnasium.
Is that platform a stage?
What is that?
The platform?
Yeah,
Is
that's a stage. So at elementary school level, we tend to call it a platform because if you get into a legitimate stage, there's all these code issues that come into play. So by doing a platform, it's what elementary schools use, and it's simple and easy.
Okay.
Kevin's nodding along, he understands.
Oh, God, this is old play to me.
Yeah. Lots of little tricks like that we use to.
You got it, guy.
Exactly.
I do like that it's adjacent to the music room as well, so concerts,
Right.
performances, that makes just logistical sense.
Plus the noise. Plus the noise.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
There's room for pickleball now.
And there's room for pickleball.
anything else on the first floor? We scroll down to the second, which is really half of the second floor, right?
Yeah, so I think a point that Mike was trying to make was that kindergarten and first grade have to be on the first floor, so there can't be anything that they access that's on the second floor. So all our, any special ed classrooms that are specific for first and second grade, or kindergarten and first grade have to be on the first floor. The gym, the CAF, the library, art, music, all have to be on the first floor. So we did try to get as much as we could up on the second floor, trying to reduce the footprint of the building so it fits better on the site. And just, again, back to combining areas that seem to make sense. So third and fourth grade working together. They have their own toilet rooms, they have their own resource room, and staff area. So they have everything that they need on that floor in their wing. And so what's kind of nice about having it decentralized a little bit like that is that students and teachers don't have to go all the way back to a particular wing for a particular service. That everything that they need is decentralized into their zones. It cuts down on the amount of traffic and just time spent in the corridors getting to and from spaces. So yeah, with the overall shape of the building, kind of, I think somebody called it a dragonfly. That just helps because then that central core becomes really essential in getting people to and from all the different locations that they need to be. The general shape, and we don't have the renderings of it yet, but we had gone through this earlier, that we're trying to fit into the neighborhood with the same style of architecture and materials. It'll be a mix of brick and siding, and there'll be mostly flat roofs, but with some pitched roofs, trying to incorporate several different design styles, but to basically try to fit into the neighborhood as best as possible. And it's obviously a school, so the brick and some elements to make it more municipal looking will be part of the design, but at the same time cognizant of the neighbors and making sure that it doesn't look awkward in its place, that this is a very rural community, and so we're going to focus on trying to come up with a rural looking design. Pretty much in the plans.
Any questions or comments?
Well, you got a place out there to put a pasture to match the yard across the street, put cows in front of it.
And mow the lawn at the same time. Perfect.
Goats.
So I noticed there are only 4 fourth grade rooms. Is that because the
couldn't help it.
class sizes are
Class size
larger?
increases.
Larger than 4?
We can accommodate 96 with 4 fourth grades, and we've been under that, so we felt pretty good about it.
Plus, with that wing, if you end up with a year where there's 5 fourth grades, but only 4 third grades, you can always swap that classroom back and forth. So having 9 classrooms for the 2 grades seemed to make some sense.
The chances are we'll need enough 5 of any grade that we should build that way, but that we need 5 of all. So it may not be as convenient, but there's some rooms to flex where we have those bubbles. And also, just while you're looking at the floor plan, there's something actually Kyle doesn't even know that Mike and I talked about this earlier today, which is don't get too tripped up on what grade we've assigned to each room. Just know that 3 and 4 are on the top in K1, because something that I realized that we were talking about earlier was we have them in a straight line right now, and I thought that looks really clean on a floor plan, but then when you go into the building, when you realize like that's a really far walk from 1 4th, it makes more sense to cluster them. So think about it may end up being like, instead of first and second, it's more first and second, you know, because you can
Really-
when you can all come out of your door and look at each other,
Yeah.
it leads to collaboration more than
We were like, it's
All the
2
way down the
triangles, it's sort of,
Yeah.
3 against 2, and then the
yeah.
opposite.
So just know there's classroom spaces, and that's generally where they're assigned. Don't get too tripped up on.
Well, I think that leads into another sort of speech, and that is, we're still very early in the design on this, that this is really only conceptual. Don't look at each room and say, this is where it's gonna go eventually. David and I were talking before the meeting, there's a few other things that we'd like to see some changes to. So the steps in the process are, the concept is where we're at now, so that you folks and the district, and when you get to the district meeting, know what we're voting on, the size, the quality, the cost. But that if it were to pass, one of the first things that we do is design development, that we start taking this and start to ask the tougher questions, is this exactly what we want? And things start to move. It's like one of those little puzzles you get at the fair where there's 16 blocks and 1 block missing, and you gotta move them around to get a picture. Well, it always seems like that 1 block is not in the right spot, and by the time you get it moved to where it's supposed to be, it's changed everything. That's what happens during design. If we start to move one thing, it's a domino effect throughout. So don't get too wedded to the shape and look of it right now. Things are going to change when we have the time and ability after the vote, and we're allowed to get into that level of it. So, feel free, if there's more changes like that, feel free to mention them. I think that's gonna come out during that process after the vote.
Where are we at square footage wise?
80,000 square feet. That's another good thing to point out for people that have been following this process, that at one point we're as high as 96,000 square feet, and that we've cut and cut and cut. And as recent as just last week, cut like another, 5,000 square feet out of it?
50.
And so the committee has done a yeoman's job of working with me and my team on getting this as efficient as possible. We really feel it at 80,000 square feet, it's a very efficient building.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of the cuts have been as a result of not just like talking amongst the committee, but also talking with staff about usage and talking with getting some of the community feedback too. I know, for example, there was a lot of open spaces that were cut.
Yeah.
And there was feedback that was received by the committee that, maybe paring down some of the open spaces it might be nice to have, but not necessary. And so
Exactly.
that's
a great point, that there's no programs, no meat that was cut out of the program. It was all nice things to have, but we didn't necessarily need, and/or that we had something covered twice that we didn't need to. And so the plan is much more efficient than it was, but we haven't lost anything.
And I can say, hours were spent of care and consideration. It was, as we said, it was a scalpel job when it came to cutting, not a hacksaw, a hatchet. It was finding feet here and there and carving and whittling away so that we could still keep the essence of what we're looking for, just in maximizing the space and getting it in the most efficient way possible. It was hours.
I don't want to derail you from I don't know the order of your presentation, or I don't want to derail you from it, but I'm just curious.
Question period, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just curious if it might make sense to talk about a little bit, because I've seen a lot of feedback about why aren't you renovating the current school? And from a design perspective, I think that some of that might tie in, like just looking at, we just went through a really comprehensive design that works well. I guess if that's in your budget analysis, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but.
Absolutely.
So, I'm sorry, before you go into that, can I just ask a question about the gym? What did you say about the floor? That it's gonna be the size of a middle school, but something was not gonna be there?
Yeah, so the court lines are the size of a middle school. It might not have the same amount of bleachers as a middle school.
Right, that was my next question. Is that what those are, bleachers?
Yes, those bleachers.
Okay.
Yeah, so it might not have the buffers, the setbacks, the bleachers, that kind of stuff, but the court itself would be middle school.
You can go out of bounds. You just got 9 inches before you hit a wall.
Well, that's okay, you can't even step out of bounds in the court.
Right. Yeah, go on to the budgets.
All right.
And so, early on, like 2 years ago, we did a life cycle cost analysis. And the way that I do a life cycle cost analysis is I don't just look at the cost of construction and the cost of energy. I also look at the effect on maintenance and human resources. If you've got a new building versus an existing building, your maintenance is not going to be the same. The maintenance on a new building should be pretty close to zero, at least for a few years. Over time, you're going to have to start to replace finishes, obviously filters, but things start to break, pumps, motors, but it takes time. If you've got an existing building that you're doing renovations on, if you don't replace every one of those motors and every one of those fans, they're going to need to be replaced probably sooner than later. So comparing the two, the new versus existing, the new is always going to be less maintenance than the renovations. Same thing on staffing, that if you've got an existing building, there's certain things that you just simply can't fix. And so if there's a layout problem that makes it difficult for a teacher to get certain work done, or if there's lighting that's bad, if there's ventilation that's bad, it's really tough to fix all those to the same level as new construction. The effect then is, I did a quick study for a couple of different districts where I looked at, they had a brand new school and they had an old school, and I looked at the absentee rates for the teachers for both those schools, and come to find out the new school had a 3% less absentee rate. It might not seem like a lot, but when you add that up against all the teachers in the entire school, it ends up to thousands and thousands of dollars worth of time that's being lost because of sick building syndrome in that school. So if the lighting's bad, it causes a headache, that person calls out, you're now paying extra for that person to come back. So if you've got a brand new school where the lighting is well designed, mechanical system's well designed, you're going to have less absenteeism. So it's not just the building itself, it's also the human resources that we need to be thinking about. And when you multiply that across the 20-year life of the bond, the human resources ends up being a pretty big factor. You think about your budget, you had told me it was 80% of the cost of your budget is salaries. So if there's something we can do in the buildings to make that more efficient, it's going to be worth it over time. So what these charts show is 3 different scenarios. The first one is repairs only, where you stay in the existing building and each year you budget for replacing something. One year it might be the main electric panel, the next year it might be the boilers, the next year it might be rooftop units. And what's happening is some years that cost is high, some years that cost isn't as high. You end up with this sawtooth effect on your taxes. One year it goes up a huge amount, the next year it goes down. The next year it goes up, the next year it goes down. There's no way to control that because you're constantly gut reacting to problems in the building. If you then do a major renovation to that, it really helps by flattening out that curve. Instead of the sawtooth effect of your costs every year, it flattens it because you've got a bond payment that is roughly the same every year. The problem is that your utilities continue to be high because with a renovation, there's no way to bring the building up to the same level as new construction. And your human resources and maintenance remain high because, again, you can't bring the existing building up to the same level as new construction. So when we look at the third scenario, which is all new construction, you've got the bond payment. But that's pretty much it. That your maintenance is going to be close to zero. Your utility costs, particularly if we go net zero on this building, your utility costs are going to be pretty close to zero. And then your effect on human resources, hard to predict, but it's going to be less. The impact is going to be less, or it's going to be more favorable than either of the two prior, because you've got a better building that people are going to want to work in. There's going to be less sick building syndrome. A lot of, particularly younger people in the workforce, appreciate workplace conditions over salary. So you're going to have a better opportunity to retain teachers and to hire them at a lower cost than you would in the existing building. So, it's a very long-winded way of saying, when you look at the cost of renovations versus the cost of new construction, all things being equal, there are benefits to the new construction that outweigh the renovations in terms of the benefit of having a lower costing, energy efficient building, better impact on your both students and teachers, and the flattening effect of having a standardized bond payment instead of the effect of every year having to knee-jerk react to whatever's failing at that time.
And might I add to this slide, which is, this is a budget analysis, so we're talking dollars and cents, but I want to talk about student impact. If you look at that top box, the white box on the top, you're talking about impacting students' education negatively. The total students in that model up there, I would guess is somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 students.
Because every year it's a new.
Every year it's a new. We're starting at our 450, and we're just going to add about 100 every more. So you get up. That's how many students. The second one, the renovation, we're at 450 now. Even to do that, even to get to that flat line, you're talking about probably 3 years of projects going on that are going to have an impact in the school environment. So at that case, you're probably looking at impacting 600 to 700 students in that model. The bottom model, which is the new building, has zero negative impact to the students. They are still learning where they are now, where we're building something new, and when it's ready, we move them, so there's no... So while we're talking about analysis and budgets, I want to just make sure that there are non-monetary aspects to think about when we're budgeting as well.
But I think even with addition and renovations, I don't know if this is included in the cost. I don't see a breakdown for if we were to do additions and renovations.
Yeah.
But moving those students to safe locations while we're performing those renovations and additions comes at a higher cost.
Yes, absolutely.
So that should also be factored in. You know, I don't know where we're at ballpark for.
Yeah, I think the question was asked the other day. What is the exact cost between new construction and additions, renovations? And over the past 2 years since we started doing the study, that has been a moving target because every month there's inflation, and it's been a different subject every time. Sometimes it's the steel, sometimes the mechanical equipment, sometimes it's the electrical equipment. It's been very difficult to come up with actual costs for the past 2 years. So at this point in time, all I've got is the analysis we did 2 years ago, and that's what this is based on. Mm-hmm. And what I've come to the conclusion on is that with inflation across the board, that all these numbers would be correspondingly higher this year than it was before. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily the exact cost that's what's concerned, but the delta between these different options. And to your point, there's costs in the additions, renovations, such as moving kids around, that don't result in a benefit. It's just, you have to buy portables for 2 years, and there's a cost. So there's additional costs that above and beyond that. So my recommendation is to not try to focus so much on the exact cost, but to look at these charts and say, do you want to have to react to changes to the building every year? Or do you want to have a standardized payment every year so that you can project what your taxes are going to be? Or do you want something in the middle where, your utility and human resources numbers might be higher, but at least you've got a bond cost that's lower, but then you've got those other issues. So really the decision ought to be based on not the numbers, but the value in what you're getting for that, educationally and financially, from a normalization of the tax rate. Does that make sense?
I think too, on if you take the first approach, there's also a certain amount of guessing that goes into that. You're hoping that you're fixing the right thing.
Right.
And if you spend a lot of money to fix the thing and something else is what goes down on you, you have to fix that then. You go back to the electrical switch that failed on us 2 summers ago. We almost couldn't open school because we didn't have electricity, and the cost of getting that repaired was pretty high.
Got a lot
Came
of
out of
luck.
nowhere. Got a lot of luck on it.
A lot of luck.
And, so imagine if you had used your resources to fix something else and then that switch went. That's the kind of scenario that we're in with the building and just how aged things are.
Well, and I think, it might help if I explain a little bit about what some of these components are that are difficult to change. One thing that's really important is that from what I've seen from the original drawings, there is not a stitch of insulation in the walls in the existing building, none, anywhere. And so if we were to add insulation, where would you put it? It's a brick wall, concrete block on the inside, brick on the outside. The best way that I would recommend, I don't recommend doing it, but if you had to, you would put insulation on the outside of the brick and then cover that again with another layer of either siding or brick or something else. So it really seems to defeat the whole purpose of the building. You're putting brick on the outside for its durability, but now we're going to cover it up with insulation. So really there's not a good way, there's not a cheap way of insulating that building, without ruining some other component to it.
Most of the insulation in that building is just, I'm gonna say, pellets, just poured in between the block work back in the day.
There could be
Vermiculite.
There could be some vermiculite in the
And that's
cores.
about it, but putting insulation on the outside, I think, covered, you're gonna get a moisture issue again.
Yeah.
No doubt about
And
it.
a lot of the bricks are already, they're cracking.
Well, they're all designed to,
Yeah,
Well,
there's
they
a
were
lot
designed
of
to
it.
not have insulation, so you
Exactly.
put insulation on it, you're starting to change the dynamics,
gonna
and you
affect
end up
it even more.
spalling, and, so, good point, that there's all sorts of stuff that it's hard to predict what the unintended consequence would be on that type of activity, so
Yeah.
trying to do an addition renovation in this particular case. Now, I don't recommend it every single time. I'm working on a project where we're renovating an 1895 school building. There's some value in it though, because it's a very substantial and important structure. Your building here, mid-80s, there's not the same, the 1930s building we would want to preserve, but outside of that, there's not as much historic value or value in the building itself in terms of the style of construction.
Need a place for the SAU.
We can put them in there.
So I took some notes based off of some of the conversations as a committee that we've
Yeah.
had. I think this is an important conversation about the renovation option, because I've personally seen a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, not a lot of people are here to ask those questions, but
Yeah,
I want to try my best to, address as many of the points that I think have come out. And you've already started doing that, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
There was just a couple more things that I noted, and I think Mike alluded to this, but with the renovation option, one of the things, even in a number that you're proposing, these are older buildings of varying ages. There's going to be a component of that you can't predict what you're going to find when you start to open things up.
Right.
And so, from a cost predictability standpoint, new construction should theoretically be slightly more predictable in terms of what you're dealing with when you're constructing, because you're starting from scratch. Yeah?
Right. Right.
In terms of the actual building itself, like the current building, right? Because I believe when you first showed up at the Reimagining GMS, at least my opinion was that there was no preconception about what was going to be the solution. There was a big emphasis on maybe this building could be renovated, right?
Oh, absolutely. When we were first hired, we were hired for one specific purpose, to put a new elementary school up next to the middle school. And we immediately said, no, we're going to look at these other options as well, much to the chagrin of the building committee at the time. But I think it was a good thing because we ended up sorting out, 9 options altogether, and coming up with what the best one, I think, is I think that process proves out a better solution in the long run. And I just want to, you're touching on a very important subject, and that is there's not one fatal flaw in the existing building that's causing us to say it should be new. It's death by 1,000 arrows, basically, that there's so many little things going on with that building that it tips over the threshold where you'd want to say, is it really good money to spend on renovating it, or is this good money after bad? And that's kind of where I'm at with it. That, again, I don't come into any project, and I certainly didn't come into this one thinking, absolutely, we need a new school. And in fact, I think I pushed back a bit, if Tina remembers.
You did, I was mad at you.
Yes, I made a few people mad at me.
Yeah.
But it was good to vet that through to make sure that we're making the right decision.
So there's a few of the
Yeah.
things that I have listed here that you just alluded to, some of the arrows, I guess, so to
Yeah,
speak, that
yeah.
I think, again, would be beneficial just to mention,
Yeah.
so that people understand, like, when we're looking at just purely numbers, there are many things that we can't achieve with the renovation. So this site, and one of the reasons that we originally looked at other sites, why I think that was the overall idea was go to a different site, was there are some water issues on this site. The current building, and maybe you could speak to this, the current building, if we were to renovate this, the foundation's already there, right? So there's only so much that we can do. And I think you were saying in one of the meetings that the foundation's at where it's at, right? Like, we
Right.
can't build it up at this way. You're not gonna raise this whole
Right.
mishmash of buildings that are
Right.
bandated together. So that was one piece that I think that we discussed that we're really not gonna be able to touch. And so we will continue to have these issues where there's water seeping up through the floors potentially. And part of the goal is to try to avoid some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's one issue, but there's really other, even more important issues than the moisture, and that is the proximity to 3A, that is just too close to the street.
It's on my list.
And you can't move that. Like I said, there's not a stitch of insulation in the existing walls. There's some in the roof, but not anything in the walls, except for maybe the vermiculite. That was a good point about Kevin made. That all the systems are aging, and to replace them all would be hugely expensive, and to do that in an existing building is more expensive than in new. Handicap accessibility, other code issues, there's the list goes on and on. The moisture issue, I actually think, is probably much further down the list. It's probably
I
8 or
didn't put
10.
them
Yeah.
in an order of priority, but I
Yeah.
did. I was just
But the
you
moisture is
just touched
something
on-
a lot of people bring up.
Right.
And it's.
But
yeah.
we are, but just to that point though, we've acknowledged that there is some moisture on this site, and with respect to the proposed new building, that is something that you can adequately address with a new construction, that we're not putting people in a position where we're gonna have a building with moisture issues down the road.
Absolutely. So for an example, we can put drainage pipes underneath the building. So basically every 10 feet on center, put in a plastic PVC perforated pipe that carries off the groundwater so that it never comes inside the building. There's simple things like that are pretty cheap and easy that we can do. I think overall, we would have to study the site a little bit more, but I think that there's a way to catch the water that's coming off that hillside, bring it into a detention area where we can handle it, let it infiltrate into the ground, and or slowly buffer through the culverts that we have going across 3A. These are things that we can do with a major project. It's a little tougher to do that one piece at a time with the existing building, particularly with it so close to the property lines.
And can I just add too, the last 10 to 15 minutes we've been talking about the current building, and we've been looking at it and we've been talking about it because there's many issues, but even just from a performance angle, we haven't even gotten into design angle, which is that the current building, if we were to renovate it, even if you just kind of cleaned everything up and fixed everything as it is, you'd still have classrooms that are anywhere from 150 to 300 square feet too small. We still have 6 classrooms that are portable that have to be assumed into that building. So to bring the classrooms up to space, like just imagine just going down the hall and you're going to have to carve from other rooms that are already there to make the other rooms bigger. And if you look at the land,
What do you
we
do?
can't go west because you hit a highway. You can't go south or east because you hit a neighborhood. You can go north, I guess, but then there goes all of your parties. So like we are very much land trapped where we are. So that to even get to the point where, and I'm not talking about, I'm talking about adequate design. Just to get to adequate design, we have to take a number of, we need a number of, or a lot of land to expand out or expand up. So, and I just wanted to bring that up because we just went for 10 to 15 minutes and all we were talking about was building performance, not even design.
Yeah, so if you look at the new plan with the classroom layouts that we've got, it really encourages collaboration and working together between the grades and between the teachers. That's something you don't have with the existing building. It would be very tough to build that in.
Do you remember, Dan, we talked about how far does a first grader have to walk to get to the nurse's office if they're not feeling well? Do you remember what that measurement was?
Well, it takes me 2 minutes, so I'm guessing. I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
actually taken the foot out, but rough estimate. So, nurse, you get, let's say 20 feet to that hallway.
While he's
Probably
doing that, let's
150.
keep in mind too, the nurse's office is an old locker room.
Which bathroom? Yeah,
Yeah.
showers. Right? It was showers before it was a nurse's office.
You know what? I'm betting that all said and done, if it's the furthest first grade classroom, you're probably at 400 feet.
Easy.
I
I still
more than
have
that.
trouble finding my way to the back where the first graders go.
You have to mop it when you get sick.
Yep.
The carpet.
And you know,
Yeah.
again, just like
Yeah.
you said with the site, you know, it is very close to 3A, and
Yeah.
it's hard to quantify unless you're someone that works in the school. That when you have kids that may be prone to running, you don't have a lot of time to react to prevent them from running into traffic. We have no queuing options here in terms of traffic, which I also seem to hate in the mornings when we're parked on the side of the road. And also importantly, if you look at the new plan, there is a fire lane around the whole school. We cannot get a fire lane behind this school right now.
Right.
Which from a safety perspective is just really terrible.
Can't even get a walking lane.
You
behind
can't even
this
get it,
road.
yeah. I mean, in 1930, when they put the school there was plenty of room around it because that was a small building at the time. It's grown, you know, and it's just unfortunate, but there's a lot of problems we can't solve.
Can you bring it? Because can you bring up the picture of the land?
Land.
The land.
Yep, give me a
I
second.
can say this, that the 1930 section, it was well-designed because it's above the water.
Right.
I just because
Because you can use the lower level, it's still dry.
can you make it a little? Just because it took me a while to orient.
There's another side
how
to
big
this.
everything is and how small it is. When we talk about the 30s building, just remember
I wasn't there then.
that's it. That is it.
That's it, that little box, yeah.
That is it.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
all of this has been expanded, but I was just like, "Where's the 30 building?" I'm like, "You just expect it to be bigger," and then you're like,
So
"Nope, it's a tiny little dot in the bottom."
to
There were
punctuate a couple
3
of the points,
classrooms
Dan and
a
I were
cafeteria in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Dan and I were standing at the exit that's in between the 30s building and the first grade wing today. And I'm telling you, if a student were to bolt out that door, they're on 3A, before you could really react. You stood back on the baseball field, because we talked about, well, we're still on 3A. What was your sense of how far that is?
It's a lot farther. I mean, it definitely solves, I mean, you could tell just even by the driveways, like how much space you'd have to the road.
Yeah.
It solves a lot of those problems.
I just
And
wanna-
again, I mean, I know you're saying like, don't focus on the water. My concern was, are we gonna be able to, deal with the water? But we walked that site in
The wettest day.
torrential rain.
It poured all weekend. It was that, I don't know, that near hurricane thing that came up. It poured all weekend, and we were in pouring rain on a Monday, and
And we walked through the woods, so we actually got to see why the middle school site really wasn't a good option, because that was very wet.
That was
But it was encouraging to see, and I think it's great to see it,
There's another side to this, that it's the structural consideration and the drainage consideration.
Yeah.
The existing drainage has not been maintained there for years, with ditch lines and stuff like that. Because of environmental reasons today, we didn't have them back there, we dug a ditch and everything went.
Right.
Today, we got a single-story building with a foundation design load for 1 story.
Yeah.
We're talking 2, that's a whole different point of view.
Yeah.
And without that, we're putting portable classrooms on a floating pier.
Yeah.
Okay, which moves all the time, but there are a way out, it works. But it's not a long-term effect. I like what you guys have done, is looked at the long-term effect.
Yeah.
Option A, B, and C, all the way down through. I have to admit that. There's a lot of folks out there with the new tax bill this year, breathing heavy.
Yeah.
And that's part of life. But in this case here, I remember when they put the addition on, and that's where I went to school. I was in the old school and in the first edition. And we played marbles out there. But I'm just saying, okay, the whole problem here is that the existing school that we have there has been a piece.
Yeah.
And the additions have been, the additions have helped out, but the portables were still in addition because things have changed to kindergarten. But to use the existing structure for a roof or a second story is out of the question.
Yeah.
Structurally.
Yeah.
You don't understand what I'm talking, okay? This doesn't have the capacity or the steel to hold it up.
So you're basically saying if somebody were to say, well, why can't you just do a second floor to the existing?
Yeah.
The foundation of the existing cannot handle.
Cannot handle the load.
Absolutely.
We go through that in homes every day and in commercial buildings every
Yeah.
day when they add something up. It's a whole different ballgame. But I'm just saying here, it's a school that lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Birth control didn't work back in the day. I just being off the record, okay? Sorry, people.
Just tell Oscar to turn the camera off for a minute.
Okay, and then everybody moved into town.
Right.
This all occurred in the 60s and 70s, the big jump here.
Right.
In the 80s, and things changed.
Right.
I'm sorry about the control thing. I apologize.
It's all
It's
right.
my construction, not background.
I don't
Kevin,
think
back
there
in
are
the day, what
children
did you guys tie your horses up when you went to school?
We didn't have horses because we used them to keep the grass mowed. Okay, and I'm looking at other lawn here. We may have to borrow a couple cows across the street to help on budgets.
Goats are effective.
Goats are very effective, and kids like goats.
You make a good point, Kevin. I got involved with this because I really want to see something that, in 20 years, I don't want to make a decision that in 20 years someone says, why did you make that decision?
You got it.
And I, can't reiterate enough, like, I personally have spent a ton of time considering all the options because obviously I don't want my tax bill to go up either. It is not fun when you have to pay more taxes. But the tax bill is going to go up if we don't do something because the school is going to be a problem. Like, we are going to continue to have to educate children somewhere.
The maintenance cost of this is getting out of control.
And
Okay?
unpredictable.
And that's half the battle right now.
That's the key. We're going to
Okay,
be
and
ponying up.
I know I'm overstepping a bound because I'm a selectman, okay, but I'm also a taxpayer. So I'm looking at this thing, what can we do to make it back? And I've seen many buildings built in my lifetime, I've been involved in them, and I just feel the long-term effect is, sometimes it's good to go new. We tear down homes all the time because the costs of doing them are just not right with today's rules.
So you're agreeing that additions, renovations would be difficult, if not
Very
impossible.
difficult to do here, very difficult.
Another point too, Dan, because you brought up as far as the existing building and different things.
I
I'd
just
encourage
lost my
anyone to,
votes.
like you talked about drop off,
votes.
I'd encourage
Lost my
anyone
votes.
like in the afternoon, just be there in the afternoon for a pickup. It's a logistic nightmare. I mean, buses on the playground, you can't even get into the parking lot. and
It
when you
works,
do
it's not ideal.
No, I know, you have the system down, but
It takes
takes a
five
half
staff
an hour.
members and
Yeah.
takes a half hour.
it's,
I would encourage people, there is a video that we shot with a drone, watching those
Yeah.
buses and cars coming and going in the afternoon. It's on the Reimagining GMS website. Watch that video if you don't have time to go down there and see it in action. It's unbelievable.
Well, in the vein of how that adds cost, right? We just did an analysis this year on the school board as to how many buses we need, right? And the amount of time that it takes to load and unload students and get in and out of school does directly impact those things. So again, it's just one more efficiency that we gain. I'm not saying that we could drop another bus, but I'm just saying, ultimately, those are the things that you can't, when you're factoring in a number, you can't take every possible savings into account.
And you talk about someone running on 3A, I think that whole pickup thing is a liability nightmare.
Agreed. We've had accidents out there, and there'll continue to be accidents. until we
Thank you
get
for going
cars
through
off
all
the-
of that, Kyle, because I mean, there's so many.
There's so much more that we've done with the reports and whatnot, so, some of these, I feel like we glossed over very quickly. The 1,000 arrows on that building, you'd have to really dig into the report to understand
I
how
think
difficult it
Our
is.
challenge is to get the information out there in a way that people can understand it.
Yeah.
And come to their own conclusions, being well informed about all the work that we have put into exploring.
It seems as though with all the information that we have now, in the past 2 years, that the current plan is a good one because it solves all the problems. It does it with land that you own, and historic location of the school. And I think that from the cost standpoint, which I know is hot on everybody's mind, that the cost of doing nothing is significant. And so the cost of actually being proactive and building this building over the life of the bond is going to be better value for you than the other options that we've considered. So this is a good option for all those reasons.
Can I chime in with one other thing that I don't think I heard mentioned unless I was zoned out for a minute? But I'll make the statement that I've heard at a couple of public forums that this is a scramble and a punt that we've moved to this idea. And I just want to go back to the idea that we looked at 9 different options as we've gone across this. I mean, I know I'm new to Litchfield, 2 years in, but the whole time I've been here, we've been talking about all the possibilities. There were conversations about putting it on a parking lot at LMS, or putting it in the Litchfield at LMS, putting it, like, this is not a new conversation. This is not something that we've thought through and thought out as a committee in conversations and talked about all of those different possibilities. I think that's just really important for the public to hear, that this isn't oh gosh, we lost the land, now what? Let's figure this out quick. I just think that's
I
important.
think what goes along with that, and it's probably what I'm sure several people are thinking of, we never considered we did talk about putting the school in the back at one point.
Yeah.
But,
This is option 2 out of 9.
right, but then we were like discouraged from doing that. We said, let's find another piece of land. So just for people listening, can you explain as to why we ventured out looking for a different piece of property?
Yeah, so when the first 5 options that we came up with, this was actually option 2. We settled on the recommendation for a new school on a new site for a number of different reasons. Some of which was the water issues, that it felt wrong to put a new building on the same property as the existing one if the water issues were that bad. And the other thing was that the location of the building in town, if it was new property, could have been designed someplace better than currently where it's at now. And so the property closer to this building seemed like an ideal place, but without that being available, option 2 became the better solution. So out of the 9 solutions, option 2 is the best one when number 1 was no longer available. So it's to your point. Yeah, I've been on this for 2 years, 2.5 years now. Right. So this is not a gut knee-jerk reaction to a situation. This is something that we planned out quite well in advance.
To anchor back on a point that Kyle made as we transition into the budget for the project, to get the state building aid, we had to solve a number of problems. And when we came back to this, we said, we have to continue to solve every problem to still qualify for the building aid. And you're confident that this option solves all of the
Absolutely.
problems and addresses everything on there. So, you know, we were not gonna say, well, we'll sacrifice $1 million of building aid. No way. It was like, we need to qualify for the 7 that we've been designated for, and make sure that whatever we come up with keeps us in the running for that. So, you know, proximity to 3A, we're further back, it's a long haul, it keeps us in the game. So that's really key, that we said, and we have to deduct 7 off whatever price tag we come up with. So, Tyler, do you want to walk us through how you came up with a price for
Sure.
this?
I was about to say, it would be worth recapping where we're at with state building aid. So, yeah, we submitted an application for state building aid, got ranked. We're currently number 5 on the list. The top 3 have been awarded funds, but one of those did not pass their bond, and therefore may be dropped off the list. If that happens, if they try to vote again and they lose their spot, Litchfield will be offered its allocation, which is somewhere between roughly $5 million and $7 million. Now, that's based on the square footage of the building, the cost per square foot of the building, and the addition or deduction of a bunch of ineligible items off the list. And so when you look at what the state allows for square footage, and you look at what the state allows for cost per square foot, that's what comes up with a range of 5 to 7 million. The issue is that range was developed last year based on costs for construction last year. We've since then had another year's worth of inflation, and so the 5 million has really become the 7 million because of that inflation, and that we can't exceed that because that was the cap that was determined when we submitted for the state building aid. So we can't go over 7 million, but I know because of inflation that it's going to be the higher end of that range that they predetermined. Now, we're still number 5. Concord is in front of us, but Concord has basically come out, this is what I was told, it came out and said that they would be passing on any additional funds this year because they want to go into the next round to try to get more state aid. That if there's only 10 million available and they're looking for 40 million, they're going to wait to try to get more money. So the almost inevitable circumstances that Litchfield would be offered the 7 million next summer if things pass at town meeting in March.
And the reason they qualify for more is mainly 2 parts. One, they're bigger districts, so they need a larger school, and also because their free and reduced numbers are much larger than us, so they get back a larger percent of it.
They get a larger
So
percentage.
for them, when we're offered 10 million and we can get 7, that sounds great. When they're offered 10 million and they need 40, or they expect 40, doesn't sound as good.
They're going to pass. They're going to pass. Now, if they pass, they stay on the list, and next year they might get their 40. And if the state has $40 million to give, it would go to them. So if Litchfield passes on the 10 million this year, it could be 2 years before we rise to the level where we get the next allotment. Yeah. So
I also think it's worth noting, we've said it before, but I'll say it again. If you take free and reduced lunch out of the mix and you go just based on the conditions of the building,
Yeah.
we are second on the list.
Yeah.
So free and reduced actually dropped us down because in the eyes of the state, we're considered a wealthier community.
Right. So I think there is a certain level of anxiety over the state aid because, again, keep in mind that the state budget's a biennium, and they're also shifting the way that the schedule by which they issue the funds. So next year, the applications are due the April 1st of 2025 to be distributed July 1st of 2025. And so if that's when Concord gets their allotment, and if they take all of that bienniums, you won't have a chance of getting any money until July 1st of 2027. So if you miss this opportunity, it's not just another biennium, it's basically 3 years before you have another chance at it.
And there's still no guarantee as to what the state would actually allocate.
And then there's no guarantee. What we do know with the new rules is that they're going to stay with a competitive system. So if you were to fall off the list and reapply, you'd start at number 15, but then you'd be competing with probably another 20 districts. What we're hearing is that if you haven't applied yet, you're not going to get any money for 5 years, because there's so many districts already camped.
But you even then, you don't know what will be available for money, because it depends on what the state allocates.
Right, exactly, yeah. So there is a certain urgency to try to get this money now while you have it, because it could disappear if it doesn't pass this year.
I'm looking at one of the numbers on here, and I think when we first met you,
Yeah.
when we toured that school, and I'm sure Tina remembers, we asked, you gave us a number of what it was per square foot cost.
The Highbridge Hill School?
No, we walked through Griffin.
No, when we walked through
Highbridge
this,
Hill?
I'm not sure what the name of the school was.
The one in,
New Ipswich?
yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, we talked about taxes going up. I believe you said per square foot was like $225, something like that, was it
It
not?
was 200,
200.
total project cost.
Yeah, and right now, we're looking at, I just lost it.
It's over five.
$425 per square foot.
Just hard construction costs. There was 140 for that building back then, for the hard construction
That's a
costs.
few years ago.
12.
Okay,
12
but
years
it's
ago.
still not that much. I mean, that's what happens, the longer you wait, it's just gonna keep going up.
So my point with, if you miss the state building aid, you might think, well, we'll have state building aid 4 years from now then, right? But what's the inflation gonna be? If it's been 300% in 12 years, in 4 years, it'll probably be another 100%. It'll go from 425 to 850. Who knows?
It's like buying a house, never mind.
It-
Ridiculous.
I think a lot of people that are not in the industry don't understand how bad the inflation was. That, if you go to the grocery store and your eggs and bread went up by 10%, that seems awful. But in that same time period, construction went up 42%. So, Kevin,
God.
And so missing this opportunity and waiting is not going to solve the budget problem. It's going to make things worse. So yeah, if taxes are the issue, you gotta keep that in mind, that let's not just look at this year, but look at the next 20 years, the life of the bond. There's gonna be years where things are great, and there's gonna be years when things are bad. To make a decision based on that 1 year in particular is short-sighted.
Kyle, can you I'm watching time, because we do have a board meeting following this, and I want to make sure the public who've attended have an opportunity to comment at the end, if that's okay. So can you walk us through the budget sheet that you put together so that the public hears the numbers and how we landed there?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with Bonnet, Page and Stone. They were hired as the CM for this project, and they're doing several schools as we speak. So they have, real-time numbers on construction costs. And so the first thing, the first area of study here is the site development costs. And the site is historically the hardest to predict. And so I spent a bunch of time with Keith McBay, the president of Bonnet Page and Stone, and we went through each of these items and basically came up with a $3 million budget for the site cost. So we're talking the playfields up at the middle school, we're talking all the paving, the utilities, the drainage. So I added some extra money in there for the drainage and grading around the building to solve the water issues. So 3 million seems like, we don't have it's not a bid, it's just a estimate, it's a budget. But it seems to be, in our perspective, a pretty tight number. Going to the next one, general
And just
construction.
notice, we did save, because land acquisition, we now have it. So,
Zero.
we had the sheet that had 500,000 to buy land, and we were able to zero that out, resulting in a savings in this item, but
Would the grading and drainage have been less at the other site?
probably, so it may be absorbed there,
Yeah.
but at least there's not a land acquisition component to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
On the general construction, so we're looking at 80,000 square feet. The 425, to Brian's point, is a real number. I'm working with Bonnet Page and Stone on a 44,000 square foot addition to a school in Manchester right now, and that came in at $400 a square foot, hard construction costs only. So that, if we use the same details, and that is a good performing school, but it's not certified as a net zero. So it's going to be north of that number, the final, and we've got another year's worth of inflation. I mean, think about it, that this wouldn't start construction next summer. It'd be the following summer. So we got to project out the costs, not for just 6 months, but for 18 months waiting until construction can start. We've had, like I said, 40% increase over an 18-month period during the pandemic. You know, what's the next 18 months going to be? I don't know. So I think 425 is a very real number. That's what we've got going on right now with a little bit of a buffer built into it.
And just to repeat, anchored in a current project.
Anchored with a current
Okay.
project. Several current projects,
Yeah.
actually. So the third thing is design fees. Pretty much everything from below here is based on a percentage. So the design fees were all based on the our bid. When we first got hired, we had design fees plugged into that number. So that's a bid number. The civil engineering, we don't know. That's an educated guess on my part. And interiors and FF&E, that's based on buying the furniture. If you have a consultant actually put that package together, which I think the $60,000 you spend on it, you're going to save in bidding the furniture out. So that's there as an alternate. Furniture and equipment. When we were talking the other day, we actually cut this back a little bit, thinking that some of the desks and chairs in the existing building could be saved. It's relatively new. We would have to have a process where we go through and identify what's staying, what's going, and then looking at what we need new to come up with a real list. But this is a pretty good estimate at this point for furniture. Phone security, computers, those are all low voltage stuff that, you know, you might have a particular vendor that you want to go with. If you've got a phone system that's connected with the high school and the middle school, you'd want to stay with that. So that doesn't go through the bidding process the same as like the concrete and steel does. And that's just a percentage number again. Utility charges is another thing that we just don't know. Eversource, you never know what they're going to charge us. That could be a good number, that could be low, that could be high, I don't know. But it's a place to start from. Administrative costs, testing, it's soils testing, concrete testing, surveys and borings, obviously the survey of the property and the geotechnical work that goes along with it. Owner's project representative, that's required by the state. You have to have an OPM on the project. And then you got costs associated with legal contracts and bonding. And then finally, the last item is design contingency. We've got some money for the site. We got some money for the new construction. Adds up to about $2 million total. At this point in time, again, I keep going back to inflation. Inflation hurt us really bad the last couple of years, and so I don't want to get stuck like that again. So that's why we've got a pretty robust design contingency. It's still only 5% of new construction, so we're not talking like a huge number as a percentage, a very reasonable percentage, and the site was a little bit more at 10%. So the total it comes up to is roughly $44 million, and we've got $7 million coming from the state. So the cost to the district would be $37 million. So that would be the bond amount. Now, the state has changed the way they fund projects in the last few years in that they pay upfront. It used to be that they paid a part of the bond payments, but they no longer do that. So that allows us to bond for only what the delta that you need, not the full amount. So instead of bonding for $44 million, you're only having to bond for $37 million. 80% of that $7 million would come up front during the before construction starts. 20% would come at the end. The 20% at the end is where they reconcile the difference in cost between what was originally predicted and what the current costs are. With the numbers that I'm running, again, there's no threat that it would be anything less than $7 million.
So it's been asked of us a lot, which we've asked Kyle many times, to include every single cost. So when the town looks at this, the town is asked to see the total cost, not just of the construction, but bringing in the furniture, dealing with the grading. So the only thing that's missing from here is what to do with the current GMS. So we're very upfront that that is missing, and partly because it's a community school. It's a community decision in a way too, and
Yeah.
that decision hasn't been made, and there's very varying ways it can go. And that's why it was important for us when we designed the new school on that land, was almost to separate them out too. So it continued options for the town. So we've asked Kyle, and Kyle has kind of produced that bottom number, but we are also saying it does not have to do with a decision with GMS at this point.
And we think there needs to be a lot of ongoing dialogue about what to do with that. Are there parts of the building that the town envisions? You know, Kyle earlier in the meeting referenced the SAU moving to the 30s building, but you're gonna have to renovate the 30s building. You're gonna have to put $1 million into it and make it handicap accessible and do all those things. If that's something the town wants to do, it's adding on to this project, but that's not included as part of the scope. Just to Doug's point, we have to be clear about that.
Couple quick things that you touched on that I just want to reiterate because I saw them be reoccurring questions that in
Sure.
the public forum. Number one, you base these numbers off of dealing with your construction professionals who are actively engaged in projects, and these are based off of real-time numbers.
Yes.
There seemed to be some speculation that you, as an architect, just might have numbers that you come up with, but this is based off of actual conferring with the construction professionals.
Yes, and with the project that I have going with them right now, so it's real-time.
So you know the
numbers.
actual ins and outs of the project.
Yes.
And Keith joined us in one of our preliminary meetings. He was part of our dialogue with the team, but
Well, and I've-
Kyle's dialogued on the side with him also.
I've had multiple conversations with him about this over the past few weeks, and, none of us have a crystal ball, so these are the best numbers that we can come up
And
with.
then I just want to also reiterate that design contingency is what people might recognize as a buffer, right?
Yeah.
And I pressed you on this the other day because we know that Litchfield has a really deep sense of fear, reasonably so, of things getting out of hand or being unpredictable. And, you've worked really hard on these numbers to come up with something that you feel like has a good buffer that we're not going to be surprising
Yes,
our voters with.
exactly.
Can I also,
Absolutely.
just because I think two terms have been thrown around in town, not necessarily, but the OPR, the owner's project representative or owner's project manager, is essentially clerk of the works, because sometimes people use the word clerk of the works, they say, where's the clerk of the works? We say it's the OPR, the OPM. I just wanted to say that is essentially the same thing, different terms to the same person,
If we could
correct?
just have Dave sort of address that, because Dave's in that role of owner's project rep, and there's some subtle differences. So Dave, why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, actually, the differences are very fine. Clerk of the Works is an older term, and we are using owner's project representative more now as the acronym here, or the name for this position. And, the responsibilities include, well, they're various. I'll have to be on site on a regular basis, several times a week, if not daily. And I'll have to keep all the documents, keep all the contracts, keep all the changes, keep a log, watch construction, make sure that all the testing that's required by code is done properly and expeditiously. I have to watch the money coming in and out. There's a lot of responsibility to it, and I will be on this project a majority of the time during construction. Not full-time. I don't think I need to, soak you for full-time here on this, but certainly on a regular basis. And there will be times when I'll be there for a full week or 2 weeks, during concrete placement, that sort of thing. It's very important for me to be around. But there are going to be other times when it's just going to be monotonous work, and I can be there for an hour in the morning and not come for another couple of days, maybe.
But your job is to protect the district's interests.
I
when it comes
represent the
to
district.
design.
I represent the district, and I oversee the architectural and the construction manager's work.
Thank you.
What other questions does the committee have before maybe we should open it up to the public?
What's the expectation going into tonight's board meeting, it's,
So, not to do this again,
yeah.
but to encourage people to watch this. The documents are all linked. I think we can do thumbnail quick hits
Yeah.
on those things, and then make sure they know how they link back to, I've been using the board agenda to drive this agenda, so everything is there.
Okay.
And then it'll be another chance to get it out in front of the public, so that we can begin.
And any
further
other
listening.
questions as well can come in.
Are we sending a recommendation to the board tonight, or is
We
it-
are not. We're gonna wait until, we're meeting again next week. So I thought this could get it out in the sphere, and we could send, we could, if people wanted to vote tonight, but I think this is a lot to digest, so.
To hear from the community and have everybody a chance to digest it as well.
So, just one other thing, you didn't touch on, the energy savings.
Yeah. So this goes back to a question that Tina asked, because when we were going through a preliminary budget, she said, does this include solar? And the answer is it really doesn't. And so this predicted energy savings chart is an attempt to show that solar would be paid for on an operational cost savings basis. So, we currently are paying for electricity, propane, and oil at GMS. And so the construction budget will design a site. The team knows we want to maximize solar gain. We want to orient the building in a way and make sure that everything is able to maximize energy production on the roof. And to make sure that the building design is as tight as can be, as energy efficient, and has everything in place to become potentially a net zero building. And then the operational savings, taking the current budget, this is the FY25 proposed budget that's in front of the Budget Committee now, that's been approved by the board. We have $176,000 worth of energy costs in that budget. That's our ongoing operational costs.
Or GMS?
Or GMS.
Or GMS.
Fuel, oil,
Alone.
yeah, that's GMS alone, right. Fuel, oil, propane, and electricity. That's a lot of money. And part of it is because of the inefficiency, frankly, in the building. So to anchor everybody back, if you take the PPA, the Power Purchase Agreement, at the middle school, that locked in at $95,120 a year. And that will produce all of the energy that we need. We will have to make the purchase of the array for another $600,000 at the end, but at that point, it's generating all the electricity we need, and we're not paying another bill. So if you can see that easily, I think the 176 that we're spending can be predicted to cover PPA, to meet the needs, and probably result in cost savings on an operating budget each year. So you're just going to take the pile of money that you have for energy now, you're going to put it into potentially the array, and you won't need the whole pot, but you'll be able to generate what you need.
Actually, if I do quick math, at 176, just use the numbers, based on the current PPA, 176 a year gets you your 90 plus close to your 600 balloon payment when year 5 comes.
Correct. That's a good way to think about it.
So that's your break even.
It's
breaks
almost,
even and-
once-
it breaks even
176, obviously it'll be a little bit under, but if you just plan on paying what you're paying now, you're gonna pay your annual PPA, and you have your year 6, year 5 balloon payment,
And then
Almost covered.
at the end of that,
and then you're done.
you're done.
you're
You don't
done.
have any more utility payments or minimal utility payments.
That number drops close to zero. 10,000 a year would be a wise budgetary amount to use, but that's way different than 176. So, but it's not in Kyle's number, it's not part of the
Yeah.
number that he presented. It's in ongoing costs once you open the building, with these numbers.
Ongoing but disappearing.
Well, and we won't even try to predict what that number is really gonna be in 3 years when the building opens, because who knows where the price of oil and electricity will be. So I think it's very favorable
Don't
to
think it'll
stay
be
the
lower.
course. I don't think it'll be lower.
Yeah.
All right, anything else?
Anything else from the committee? Hearing none, I'd like to open it up for public comment and question.
I don't know, Kyle or Dave, if you want to, because they'll be best able to be heard if they're at a mic, so I'm sorry, I'm not trying to kick you out.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yes, please come up. And we'll just have you state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Ronald Blinas, 15 Riverview Circle. I think you, at least the school board know that I made comments at the budget committee and then sent them to the school board. I'm going to sound really negative, but I'm very disappointed in what I've heard so far tonight. A lot of things that I brought up in the comments that I made were not addressed tonight or even close. And a couple of things I just, at the Planning Commission, the Budget Committee meeting, it was noted that, I should go back and look at the documentation that's there, which, when I went back in, I had already looked at it previously. But a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight from what's been said before, raises questions as to the validity of how we've approached what we're looking at tonight. And what I've done is I just, for my own edification, pulled out a number of, this is the summary report of the Litchfield Reimagining Griffin feasibility study of April 7th. And a couple of things, and the reason I bring them up is, having been in the engineering world myself for 40 years and now retired, and having been a registered professional engineer in New Hampshire, Maine, and actually Australia, I think I have at least a little bit of credibility in raising some of these points. And the reason I bring them up is, going back through the other document, there's things in there that would imply that you were trying to come up with a report that satisfies a predetermined recommendation. And as a for instance, on page 1 of the executive summary, I read from that, is the results then is a prediction of slow or little growth over time, and the recommendation is designed for enrollment 100 per students. So that I think that's where you are, so you're not predicting for any growth. I think that's what I've heard previously. I'll just leave it at that. The next one out of section 1, page 3, is a new building on existing lower site, looked at building new on the existing playfield and demolishing the current GMS. But there are issues that cannot be solved. So apparently you can solve them.
We'd address that in the
No,
presentation.
my point is previous studies would indicate that you were trying to come up with a solution or a report that addressed what you wanted to do. The reason I bring this up is it raises questions on the kind of the approach and somewhat the credibility.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
'Cause that's a great question. It's a great point. So when we looked at all of the options, right, from my personal perspective, I was looking towards what is the best option that will ensure that in 20 years, no one's going to come back and say, why didn't you think of that, right? And so obviously the building on a different site, we talked about proximity to 3A is an issue. We are now much farther back, but we're still on 3A, right? So there still will be traffic coming in and out on 3A. There was water mitigation issues, right? And so when all things considered, there's an opportunity to potentially relocate to another place, at one point being across the street from a police station and a fire station, which for an elementary school is very desirable. That was the best solution, right? So we were trying to find what is the best solution so that there's the lowest chance of someone coming back in 20 years. I don't think anyone's tried to hide that piece, right?
Can I further clarify? That plan is talking about the softball field that's also on 3A.
Whatever, it simply said, the options were the same thing. There was 3 options of building on the existing, being modified, building on the site, or building, where essentially it's being put now, and then the third option, off-site.
Yeah. It was do nothing. The
New
upper
one
plateau, where it, I'm sorry, hold on.
Renovate.
Do nothing, renovate.
Upper plateau.
Current site, upper plateau, or elsewhere in town.
No, didn't have that. It had new building on existing lower site, that's what it's called.
Right.
Yes.
But that was.
That was one of the
Right.
options.
And that's what you're doing now.
Yes.
And that's what I'm reading. From this report, it says, the new building on existing lower site looked at building new on existing ball field and demolishing the current GMS. But here as well, there are issues that cannot be resolved.
Right, so again, we can't resolve the fact that we're still on 3A, right?
We could
So-
live with it, but we
Wait a
can't
minute,
resolve
wait.
it.
This says you can't do what was just presented.
No, it says there are issues that can't be resolved. We cannot resolve the fact that we're still on 3A, which is a busy road.
It was rejected because of these issues.
No, it wasn't rejected. What you're incorrect about is that we were selecting we were pursuing, at the time, we had multiple options that we could look into, right? One of those options being locating on a different site that might be a more desirable site. We've pursued that option. That option has unfortunately fallen through. We've done a look at the town. We've realized that there's very little land in town that people would be willing to part with that meets the size requirements, the location requirements. So we are pursuing a backup option. There are elements, as we've made no qualms about the fact that there are elements. We can't change the fact that this is on 3A. There will still be lines of cars coming in and out of 3A in the morning. We will be further back, but it doesn't solve that issue. Nothing that you're reading is saying that there are fatal flaws that make this an impossibility. What we were looking at the time was the potential of doing the best possible solution so that way people looking back would say, why didn't you think of this when you did that?
I'm not going to argue anymore with you, other than the fact that reading this as an engineer, that option was rejected as being unbuildable.
That is not what that says,
what
and
that
that is not what you said.
Well, it is.
Well,
It says
you're rewriting the script then, is what
I'm
you're
just
doing.
reading what it says.
Where in there does it say that it is unsuitable for building? It doesn't say that.
It says issues cannot be resolved. What does that mean?
I just gave you a perfect example of that. We cannot resolve the issue that we are still on 3A. There will still be traffic with that. Do you see a way that we're resolving that by building on the same site? No. Does that make that an unbuildable site? No.
Resolve, never mind.
I gotta run.
All right.
Thanks, Kevin. Good night.
All right, guys, you're fine. I appreciate your time tonight. Glad I could make it. Nice seeing you old folks.
Nice seeing you, Kevin.
Take care.
Old folks, what?
There's a couple other things in there, but one of the points that I raised in my questions is what to do with the existing building. And the reason I bring that up is in this same report, and it's referenced in the cost estimate tonight, the only cost figures that were in there was a matrix of cost comparisons. And what I find interesting in it is it did talk about a number of things that would be lower, depending on implementing additions and renovations or replacement as compared to maintaining the existing. And one of them is utilities. For utilities, the existing was estimated at $8,769,000. Additions, utilities, and this is based on, at least in here, it says 10 years. Then it reduces for additions and renovations. The 8.7 comes down to 7.1. And then with a replacement, it comes down to 2.7. So a couple of things that are a little curious there is I just heard a figure thrown out that you spend around $176,000 a year. So I'm really baffled at where utilities for the existing is $8.7 million over 10 years, or $870,000 a year. And then,
I'm trying to find the page, so.
the page is on section 6, page 4.
This was done by Kyle, right?
Yeah, and so, and then under human resources, is the category of human resources. The current human resource figure for a 10-year period is $12,208,000. Reduces, if we add, comes down to $8,916,000. And then for the replacement, comes down to $5,624,000. So,
Could you put up the graph of the three charts that we had earlier?
yeah, that's it right there.
Oh, that's it?
No, this is what I'm looking at here.
Oh, okay.
Now, what's interesting, if you do a subtraction between option 1 and option 3, you come up with about $6 million of savings. Right? Just to,
Can you-
oh,
It's just
sorry,
hard to
go back to
follow.
that. And I know numbers have changed, but I'm just talking about relative. Right. If you subtract utilities from option one, 3 from option one, you come up with just about $6 million. Human resources, you do about the same thing. It comes up to about $6.6 million. So over a 10-year period, that's $13.6 million.
So you're looking at between option one, which is repairs only,
And option three.
and option,
3.
I think these are not the building options. I want to make sure, Kyle asked me to pull up this chart because it's those 3 options, repairs only, it's additions and renovations, and it's replace.
The yellow is finance, which would be the bond.
Yep.
The blue is the human resources that we're just talking about, and the red would be utilities. And
Okay.
so with the do-nothing option, the red is pretty strong.
Yep.
It gets a little bit less if you do the additions, renovations. And it's almost nothing with the replacement cost.
Right. My point being is, I don't care what these relative numbers give advice to. Simple fact is, what you're saying here is you're gonna reduce costs between the existing and the replacement by $13.6 million over 10 years. That's $1.3 million a year. Now, utilities and human resources are out of your operating budget. Correct? So therefore, if we build a school, you reduce your operating budget by $1.3 million a year, correct?
Back to that
Right.
slide where
Yep.
it's replaced by the bond
Right.
cost.
Exactly. Yep.
Is that,
for the life of the bond, it's replaced by the bond cost.
Right, so all these extra costs up here are replaced by the bond. So what I'm trying to show with these charts and with those numbers is not so much that you're saving this boatload every year, but rather that for the same costs, you've got a flat payment every year.
correct.
And control over those increases in costs. Now, keep in mind also that these are inflated by 3% a year for inflation.
Right.
Which could be 10%, could be 2%, we don't know.
The point that I make is I'm reading this as a taxpayer. And you're showing me numbers that says the replacement will save $1.3 million a year in operating cost. And that will be replaced by the bond. So what I should expect then is the projected cost to me as a taxpayer is 0.
No, because that
Well, he
would
just
be-
said it's replaced by the bond cost.
No, that would be if we did nothing, if we didn't repair, right?
No, that's not true.
No, the
You gotta
cost
pay
of
for the
tax-
bond,
I
that
know.
comes from taxes.
What's that?
But
That
he's
comes
saying the
from
net
tax.
difference is, that's what Kyle's showing up here.
Right.
The cost per year up here is, the cost per year down here is not significantly different than the cost per year up here.
But that's to pay for the.
So
we
that's
still
not to
have
say
pay for
that
the
your
repairs.
taxes will not go up. That's to say
Right.
the difference between doing nothing and paying the bond is nothing.
Well,
There's an increase either way, but the increase should be the same, if not reducing based on the new one.
well,
There will be a tax increase.
yeah, the difficulty that I'm facing as a taxpayer and as an engineer, there's nowhere near enough information to really understand what's being presented.
What
are you
additional
looking for?
information would you be looking for?
Well, for instance, what does the $8,769,000 consist of?
That's on the other, is that on the other page?
No, it's nowhere to be found.
Well, no, I'm
That was
asking,
for-
I'm trying to
that
figure
was
out what
in
number you're
Kyle's life
referencing.
cycle
He's looking at
analysis.
this utilities number.
Yeah, so keep in mind too, that study, the date on that is what, May?
22.
22, so 18 months ago at least. So significant inflation since then. That, what I did is I have behind these numbers is a worksheet for each option, and for each part of each option. So I've got the numbers for the utilities And obviously, some of these are assumptions. I don't know exactly what the cost of oil is gonna be 5-10 years from now, so I had to look at what the state is publishing for numbers this year, what you're using, for cost, put that in for this year, and then inflated it 3% every year for 10 years. So that 3% adds up to a fair amount of increase over a 10-year period.
But what I need to see is I need to see the buildup of the 8.7 as a baseline.
So
And I need to see the breakdown of everything else in
I
there.
do have those worksheets. When you're talking about 10 options times, I think each option has like 10 worksheets. It's a lot of worksheets, but if you
Correct.
want to see those, it's fine.
Yep.
That's fine.
The reason being is that represents, to me, it's a misstatement of actual situation. And what it does is it presents that the replacement is far cheaper.
Well, you don't know that you've asked to see worksheets that support it, so you don't know that you're making a categorical statement that it's a misstatement, but you actually haven't looked at the numbers, so can you accurately say that right now?
No, what I'm saying is what I have to look at tells me that there would be a savings in operating budget on an annual basis, and I take these as gospel as I'm looking at them. They're in a report that somebody stamped as an engineer, so they mean that they're correct, or else they're in trouble.
Well, they're estimated projections based off of assumptions that
Yep,
he's happy to
understood.
provide you.
I shouldn't say stamped, I apologize for that, because it's not engineered drawings. But it is an engineer report, so it needs to be credible. All I'm saying is the numbers that are present here, if you look at them, say you're going to create a savings of $1.3 million a year over what you're spending now.
No. It equalizes the payment of a bond versus the payment of
Increased
continuation.
costs due to
The cost of
repairs.
continuation and the cost of new build should balance out over the life of the 20-year bond. That's what it shows. Not a savings over the current operating budget.
Okay, so we need to see the breakdown of how that's
And
estimated,
those are in the worksheets behind. That's what Kyle is.
and I'd be happy to look at those.
So just if I may, I think a couple of things is we have another meeting starting in 3 minutes. And I will share with everybody Mr. Glennis's questions sheet so that you all have it. I know they went to the board. I'll make sure the Facilities Improvement Committee has those. And we will work to get answers specific to the questions that you post. And that will include, available backup material as necessary to have you understand what went into the production of that. We may want to adjust those to current numbers also if we're going to take the time. I don't know what Kyle has for capacity on that, but, it's just a point to make, so.
Really quickly, just because you did bring up another point that I just want to quickly touch, because it was in your email. The question about the existing building.
Yep.
That, we absolutely want to be transparent with that. That's why we're openly saying, there's nothing in there for that, because we don't know yet what the taxpayers want. Do they want that building? You are 100% right that if that building is going to stay, something needs to be done to it. That's not there's no free option of saying, oh yeah, it's just here and then magically it's renovated.
Well, what I recommend then is you assume it be demolished. If the town wants to do something different, then that's their prerogative. But you need to assume that this project makes that goes away, and it does not become a town cost, or else you need to present that to the taxpayers, that if you keep it, it's gonna add this much to the town. Because I'm not looking at just a school budget, I'm looking at my tax bill.
Absolutely, and that's something that we need to discuss.
So
with
my
the town.
recommendation would be is you include demolition of the building.
Well, it wouldn't become town, correct? It's school-owned property.
It's school-owned property.
But
Right.
It's not
But whatever, but what he's saying is, take this
Demolition
as
at
a base.
minimum.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And if it
that's
just-
I think that's a
I
great
think that's a
suggestion.
reasonable
Okay.
Thank you for offering that.
We're not saying we're demolishing it.
Another,
No.
another,
Oh, Virginia?
I have a comment that'll take under a minute. I know you have a new meeting. My name's Virginia Kessler. I'm your neighbor. I'm at and I'm also an occasional stub at all three of our schools, but I go primarily to GMS. I was there Monday and Tuesday, and I went around to as many teachers and staff as I could, and I said, I'm going to go to the Facilities Improvement Committee meeting if I have the opportunity to speak, what do you want the public to know? What do you want the committee to know? And they all said the same thing. Our children are not safe at GMS. The building is unsafe, and we are understaffed. They worry about a respiratory illness being aggravated by the mold. They worry about children running out onto 3A. They worry about fire because we don't have sprinklers and we're so short on space. We're doing reading interventions surrounded by boxes. We are an aging school. That's true. There are maintenance costs. That is also true. But the real issue is that it's unsafe. And we need to say that out loud as often as we can. I do not care that it might cause some people to choose private school. I don't care that it might reduce the value of your home. And I don't care that it'll be on record that we were using these words if there's a lawsuit after a child dies. It's not safe, and this is what the teachers and the staff at GMS desperately want you to know. Thank you.
Any further public comment? All right, seeing none, then I will make a motion to adjourn. Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And we'll reconvene next Wednesday at on the 13th at
3:30. Yep.
Thank you.
As if we didn't adjourn, could we do?